before I started telling that story about sales, I would tell my own personal journey. And what was interesting is, I'd always get people say, Matt, your presentation was great. And I got a lot of value out of it, and I'll apply it, and all those things that every speaker kind of hears if they've done a good presentation. But the level of energy I would get from quite a few introverts that would come up afterwards and they would say, that presentation was great, but this piece where you talked about your introversion and told me that it was possible, and that was transformational for me, because I just never knew that I could succeed. As a small business owner, I always thought I was going to be terrible at networking, sales. I could never speak. I could never lead. I couldn't do any of these things. And now I get that. Even if I don't apply any of this, I now know that success is possible for me, and that is meaningful.
Hello, and welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we'll air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave a review. Tell a friend. Help get the word out there. Matthew Pollard was responsible for 5 multi-million-dollar business success stories, all before the age of 30. His humble beginnings, the adversities he faced, and his epic rise to success show that anyone with the right motivation and the right strategies can achieve anything they set their mind to. Today, Forbes calls him the real deal. Global Gurus lists him as a top 3 sales professional. Top Sales World magazine named him a top 50 speaker, and Big Speak lists him as an international top 10 sales trainer. He's also the best-selling author of The Introvert's Edge, which hit Amazon's charts as the 8th most sold book of the week, appears on HubSpot's list of the most highly rated success books of all time, and was selected by book authors as the number 2 best introvert book of all time. His second book, The Introvert's Edge to Networking, has received many endorsements, including Harvard, Princeton, Neil Patel, Michael Gerber, Dr. Ivan Meisner, and Marshall Goldsmith.
Welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, Matthew. It's so good to have you.
Mate, I'm ecstatic to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Matthew does some great work with introversion. We're going to talk about his books and things that he does, especially around sales and marketing. And I first met Matthew, we both spoke at an online event specifically for introverts, the Quietly Influential Summit. And that's something that he continues to do with Fifi Mason. It's a great event, but that's how we first connected. And I've been following his work ever since.
Well, I have to say, mate, I'm glad you did. And, as you know, I'm a big supporter of other people moving into the space. I mean, while everyone thinks you should be involved in a space where there's no competition, the truth is there's not enough people doing what we do yet. So if there's somebody listening that is an introvert coach, an aspiring introvert coach, or somebody that just wants to help in the introverted topic in general, please definitely reach out. So I'm sure David's open to that as well, but feel free to reach out to me, because the truth is there's not enough of us. And, it's more than almost 50% of the world's economy. And truthfully, there's not enough of us to support the people and their needs, but also there are not enough of us outwardly speaking about our introversion. So if you're a quiet, achieving introvert, definitely speak out and share that you're introverted, because I was blown away the moment I started sharing that, how frequently people thought, oh my gosh, now I know success is possible for me, where beforehand they just didn't. We believe as introverts a lot of times there's this wall in the way of our success. And, I spend my life telling people it's not a wall, it's actually an advantage or an edge. But more often than not, we all live in this world that, it's an extrovert's world, and how do we survive? And I think it's the opposite of that. I think it's a world built for us once we learn to systemize out our weaknesses and leverage our strengths.
Yeah, I love how you say that. And we are on the same page. It's like, it's not just something you have to accept, but it's something when you get to know your strengths and needs, you can be brilliant. And your success, as you'll talk about, we'll get into on the show, in sales and marketing and other things, it's because you're an introvert, not in spite of it. And I love that.
Absolutely. I mean, and I have to tell you, don't get me wrong, when I was younger, I didn't know that, didn't believe that. It took some time to get through that. But what I learned is introverts aren't second-class citizens at all. Our path to success is just different to that of an extrovert. And I think that is the biggest reason why I try to get, and a lot of times I spend a lot of time, supporting introverted coaches, absolutely, but also getting what I call introverted titans to speak up, which are what I call, successful people in industry that no one would guess is introverted, that just so happen to be introverted. I mean, and by the way, if you think you can't succeed in sales, I mean, Zig Ziglar was one of those titan introverts, right? I mean, he was an introverted, he's the most well-known person in sales, also an introvert. His son, Tom Ziglar, who runs the company now, is an introvert. Think we can't network? Well, Ivan Meisner, the founder of BNI, the world's largest networking group in the world, also introverted. Then you go into like the world of, hang on a second, we can't do small talk though. That's really hard. Well, Ellen DeGeneres and Oprah Winfrey, both introverted. Well, we can't be comical. Bill Murray is an introvert. Like, what excuses do we have? The answer is, the excuse is that we haven't learned the system. So let's get to work fixing that.
Yeah, and I love that. And so many times if you're surprised, like, oh, Zig Ziglar, he can't be an introvert, it just means that you don't really understand what an introvert is. And I think we both say it's not a matter of you can do something, but it's how can you do it? How can you do it with your strengths?
That's absolutely right. And I think what you'll find is people will be listening to this right now and saying, oh, but I'm more introverted than that person, or I'm more introverted than Matthew Pollard that I'm listening to right now, or yeah, he's gifted, he's clearly articulate, and I'm not. Well, I am now. I wasn't when I started. And I think that's the biggest issue. We look at people the way they are today and we say, I can't do it because they're amazing and I'm not. What I would suggest is you look at them and say, I can be that amazing, I'm just not yet. And then look at what systems they use. Now, of course, you are going to see extroverts that go up and speak from stage or do podcast interviews, and you won't be able to do what they do. And I'm not entirely certain that's a bad thing, right? So for me, I do over 100 and something interviews every year. And when I do those interviews, firstly, I batch them together. I do them at the end of my day, not in the beginning, so I can still be creative in the morning because I'm wiped after interviews like this. But also, I make sure that I deliver on point every time because I've planned and prepared, which is things that introverts are great at. And also, I do my best to make sure that it's a two-way dialogue. I'm not just speaking at people and just ignoring the interviewer. So I can keep it as a discussion, because the other things that introverts are great at are empathy and active listening. And these are huge advantages in networking, in sales, in public speaking, when you're doing Q&A. We just have to learn the systems that work for us. And if we can find an introvert, and the reason why I talk about Zig Ziglar, Ivan Meisner, is yes, I've got books on networking and sales, and they have the word introvert on them. But there are tons of people out there that are looking for advice for themselves as an introvert on, we were just talking about this, on parenting, on, leadership, things that I haven't written books on. And some of them, there are books on those topics that are out there with the word introvert on them. But truthfully, it doesn't matter. You've got to find yourself a person that you can follow, that if you type in their name, like how I found out Ivan Meisner was an introvert. Funnily enough, he's a personal friend. I never would have imagined it. But I typed in Ivan Meisner introvert, and the very first thing that came up was, oh my God, I'm an introvert. I typed in Oprah Winfrey, Ellen DeGeneres, introvert. That's how I know. Bill Murray, introvert. So a lot of times we think that there's not advice out there for our unique personality type, when all we need to do is, if you grab 10 books and write down the author's names and the word introvert in Google, you'll find someone that speaks on that topic that is an introvert. Like, funnily enough, like if you go to the global gurus list of salespeople, the best sales professionals in the world, you'll find me and my book, The Introvert's Edge, on that list. But I can tell you about half, probably even more than half of those people are introverted. They just don't publicly say it because it used to be unpopular. Now I'm almost excited to say it's kind of the popular thing now to be introverted, which is great. But yet for some people, even though outwardly spoken people are now saying, I'm introverted, a lot of the quiet achievers are still not comfortable seeing it as a positive because we're hit by the boundaries that we've actually set for ourselves because we haven't learned the systems to get beyond it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've heard you say, and I agree, and I'm not saying we can't learn from extroverts, but I think we learn best from someone that's like us, learn best from someone that's an introvert. And, that's why I wrote my first book. When I was discovering I was an introvert, I was also really busy with all kinds of things. I was reading time management books, but they didn't call out specific things for introverts. But I realized, hey, there's some certain needs I have as an introvert. And so that's what my first book was, Minding Your Time. So Matthew, let's start at the beginning. Tell us about when you were younger and how you discovered you were an introvert, because so many people, as you were saying, aren't sure where to go. So many people have discovered later in life their strengths and gifts as an introvert. And we want that to happen right now for everybody. So tell us about yourself and how you discovered you were introvert and how you learned to embrace that.
Well, absolutely. So I think the important thing is, let's define introversion. I'm sure you've done this a ton, but I think that a lot of people have different definitions. So my definition of introversion is just this: where you draw your energy from. So if you draw your energy from being with a lot of different people, then you're clearly an extrovert. If you draw your energy from being by yourself or with a small group of close friends, family, then you're probably an introvert. Now, some people say, well, I used to be introverted in the past, but I'm now more extroverted. You can't change who you are. You find things more enjoyable. Don't get me wrong. I love networking now. Like, I actually love doing it. And many of my clients also love networking, love speaking from stage, love selling. There's people that say, I'm never going to speak to a customer on the phone. And now they don't want to give it up. They wanted to go to a webinar straight away. Now they don't want to give up selling. And you would say, oh, they used to be introverted, but now they're extroverted. No, they just have a great system and it works for them, and now they're actually enjoying it. So a lot of times these things we don't think we can do, we actually love doing once we learn a system. It's like, an accountant that the first time they tried to balance the books, it was probably not fun. Now, and I know it's hard to believe, some accountants might actually really enjoy that. So the thing you've got to understand is that you don't change across the echelon. Now, sure, there are some people that are more introverted and less introverted, and some people are shy, and some people have other issues and that aren't associated with introversion that cause them to feel more introverted. But the thing I want you to understand is that for someone like me who has a system, my energy levels are still affected by doing stuff like this. However, not as much as when I first started and when I didn't have a system, and not as much when I used to go to networking. At the end of one event, I'd go home and I couldn't stop thinking about all the silly things that I said and how uncomfortable I was and what I could have said differently. It was emotionally exhausting. Gosh, we beat ourselves up. When you have a system, it's not as exhausting. And also when you understand that any conversation is the success or failure of the system, not yourself, then it's less personal, which again means that it stops taking as much energy. And I have to tell you, I know, David, you probably feel the same way. When I was younger, there was nothing out that really called that out. So for me, I always felt that there was something, I'm not going to say wrong with me, but yeah, something wrong with me, right? Like, I felt like for some reason, other people laughed at jokes that I didn't think were funny, or they would say things and everybody else would get behind it. And I didn't even really get it until later. I have to say that sometimes when I'm at these speaking events, there are some speakers that are really quick, and they're so quick on their feet and they joke, and I don't even get the joke until the moment's passed. So I'm still, I still suffer with certain things, but truthfully, that doesn't affect the ability that I've had to create 5 multi-million-dollar success stories. So don't let it limit you. But the thing that I will tell you is, for me, in late high school, I had a reading speed of a 6th grader. I was super introverted. As a matter of fact, when I was 16, I got diagnosed with this thing called Irlen syndrome. So for the video watchers, I actually put on this funny pair of colored lenses, and miraculously, I can learn to read. Now, I couldn't learn to read like everybody else. I could start the process of reading. So I hustled every day for 2 years, and I actually got into the top 20% of my state when I graduated. I was exhausted though. I'd worked so hard. My family could see that I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. My confidence had been beaten down for 2 years. My whole life feeling like the slow kid, but for 2 years, because I was the guy with funny colored lenses, and I had braces at that point, really bad acne. My confidence was anything but high. And so my family and I all agreed that I was going to spend a year going to find myself, right? And maybe some of you have got kids that have had that year to go find themselves. That was me, but I wasn't exactly the person that was allowed to just sit on the couch and watch Oprah. My dad broke his back 80 hours a week to support the family. I had to go get a job. Definitely wasn't traveling through Europe like some of those luckier family kids get to do. But I took a job at a real estate agency, and I know what people are thinking. You were the person selling. I wasn't. I was the guy in the back office doing data entry with a look on my face saying, "Don't look at me. Don't talk to me. I'm introverted. I'm here to just do my job and find myself for the year." But about 3 weeks into that job, my boss pulls me aside and he just said, "Man, I'm so sorry to tell you this. We just got a phone call from head office. They're shutting down this office. You're out of a job." Like, I'd worked there 3 weeks. And, for those that don't know Australia really well, everything's the opposite there, right? So it's summer at Christmas time. So we take our summer and Christmas break at the same time. Everybody goes away on the 15th to 20th of December, and no one's coming back till the 15th or 20th of January. So if you're an employer, a business owner, and you're thinking about hiring someone, just think for yourself. you're not going to hire someone before you go on a month-long break. You don't want to deal with that stress and hassle. Well, that is true, except for these jobs called commission-only sales roles. So I remember going to the news agency, where you get the classifieds in Australia, and pulling out the paper and saying, okay, what job can I get? Because I don't want to tell my dad I'm out of work and I'm only 3 weeks into a job. And the only jobs that I could find were commission-only sales roles. So I applied for all 3 jobs, and I got 3 interviews. And I'm like, oh, maybe they see something in me that I don't, especially considering all 3 of them offered me a job. So I took a job doing business-to-business telecommunications, and I walked in with just a touch of confidence. And my manager quickly put that to bed and said, Matt, we hire everybody. Every commission-only sales job does. We just all have this saying, we throw mud up against the wall and we see what sticks, which sounds like a fun saying until you realize that you're the mud, right? So I was this mud thrown at the wall, 5 days product training, not a single second of sales training, thrown on this road called Sydney Road in Melbourne, Australia. I didn't even know what to say. I just get told to go sell. So I walk into the first door, I take a deep breath, I walk in, and I'm politely, luckily enough, told to leave. Shortly after that, I'm less politely told to leave, then I'm sworn at. My personal favorite was always getting told to go and get a real job. But door after door, this just kept happening until my 93rd door where I made my first sale. And I remember I was ecstatic for, it would have been 45 seconds until I realized I got to do this again tomorrow and the next day and the next. And that wasn't okay for me. And I think a lot of small business owners that are listening, we kind of do one of these 2 things, right? We either give up, which, a lot of us, we just go back to busy procrastination. We do our busy work. We hope the phone rings with a deal, or we grind it out. We keep going to networking events regardless, which is fine, but without a plan, that's torture. So what I decided, and this is a key moment for me, I decided that if I was going to succeed in sales, sales had to be a system, because without it, I was going to be terrible at it. Now, I had a reading speed of a 6th grader, so I couldn't exactly pick up a book like a Brian Tracy or a Zig Ziglar book and learn a system. But I typed in sales system in YouTube and all these videos came up. And so what I did is every day I'd spend 8 hours out in the field applying what I learned, and then I'd go home and I'd spend the next 8 hours perfecting it or learning the next piece. And I did that every day. Day after day. Weekends, I'd spend 16 hours practicing. Now, I know this doesn't sound like fun to anyone, but day after day, I got better. Soon it was 71 doors, then 43 doors, and then 36 doors, 28, 18, 9, 3. Eventually, I got it down to closing a door on every third door I'd make a sale. Now, about 6 weeks in, my manager pulls me aside, and I thought I'd done something wrong. He had this weird look on his face. And now remember, I was the quiet guy, so I'd hand my paperwork in downstairs. I wouldn't even talk to anyone upstairs. All the boisterous salespeople would be, kind of talking about how they ripped that customer off or how they got that deal or how tough the market is. I wouldn't get involved. Like even the leadership team wouldn't even really pay me any attention because they always just thought I was the mud that was eventually going to fall off the wall. Well, he put me aside and he said, Matt, we just got our national sales figures and we're kind of blown away by this. Turns out you're the number 1 salesperson in the company. Now, this happened to be the largest sales and marketing company in the Southern Hemisphere. Now, just to put that in perspective, I went from terrified to sell to being the number 1 in the company in 6 weeks. Now, for most business owners, you don't have to go from nothing to that good in 6 weeks. You could do this over 3 months, 6 months, 2 years. I've carried that success with me everywhere I've gone. Shortly after that, I got promoted. And the skill set that I learned was go learn on YouTube or learn a system. So I got promoted. I don't know why everyone promotes the good salesperson. I had no idea how to manage. They said, no worries, mud up against the wall, see what sticks. No one sticks. 20 salespeople, they all quit within the space of 24 hours. But I went back to YouTube. I learned to manage. I got promoted 7 times in a year. And then I started my own business. Fast forward just shy of a decade, I was responsible for 5 multi-million-dollar success stories. So for those people that are listening, they're like, oh, it was easy. This guy's clearly articulate now. The answer is he's articulate now. I definitely wasn't back then. I had no idea. And I had a lot of I had a lot of confidence issues about self-image as well that I had to deal with. But day after day, I just improved on myself by saying everything about me is fixable. And I decided that it wasn't an issue with me as my personality or who I am, but it was a skills gap, something that I could learn a system to compensate for. But then when I realized I could compensate for these things, I also realized I could leverage all of these amazing strengths, which allowed me to run circles around my competition. I believe an introvert with a sales system, because of our advantages of active listening, because of our advantages of empathy, we can run circles around those extroverts.
Yeah, that's a great story. I can remember probably being about the same age and trying to do that, and I wasn't successful. I could have used your book back then, but I don't think it was available yet.
Yeah, so, it's only been out 8 years, and so
it
looks a little bit past that.
Yeah. So what made you then realize and kind of understand the term introvert and what that meant for you? How did you end up coming in contact with the theory about introversion?
It was only really when I started teaching others that I realized. I mean, I knew this is the thing that always gets me. I don't know why people don't talk more about it. It's interesting. Like, I know that a lot of schools are starting to help people recognize, like why Johnny and Sarah doesn't want to hang out and talk all lunch break now. But when I grew up, no one really talked about that, right? I just knew that I was a little bit odd or awkward around people, and I got stuck on my words and jumbled or get stuck in my head for something to say. So I didn't really know the answer. It was only when I started to do some management training and started to look at what I was doing and why it was different. And what I realized, it actually is interesting. It wasn't that the introverts were having issues. When I taught them my system, they were like, oh yeah, I can go out and do it. And it was really interesting because introverts without a sales system, we're kind of terrible at sales. We're terrible at networking. We're terrible at public speaking. But because of that, we hold on to a system for dear life, and we don't want to let it go, because without it, we kind of can't sell, or we can't network, or we can't public speak. But I started to notice that I kept having issues with a group of people that came to work with me that didn't want to follow a system. They just wanted to keep winging it. So I actually learned that I was an introvert by realizing the opposite, that the people that I struggled to teach that weren't getting results from my system actually had a skills gap, and that was their extroversion was causing issues that, A, they didn't want to follow my system because they weren't great active listeners, they weren't great they weren't very empathetic. The good news is, once I helped identify that, they were willing to jump in and learn those skills, where introverts often felt that they couldn't learn the skills to be successful at sales and networking. So that was an advantage because they didn't have that mental barrier that it wasn't possible. They just didn't know they didn't have that skill set. But what's interesting is that an extrovert, when they get a system, they have to take a slight back step to catapult forward, because to learn a system, to write out what you're going to say, to learn it in a way that it doesn't feel scripted, but it feels authentic, so you're presenting the best version of yourself, it takes a little bit of time. And why would an extrovert want to do that? They're naturally better than that phase 1 right away. Well, the answer is that we can get to phase 7 and they get stuck at phase 3. But it feels really hard to go from phase 3 to step back to phase 1 and baby step through, because it takes a few weeks or a month or so to get to that point. And most extroverts don't like that. They also pride themselves on their ability to wing things. So because of that, even the ones that gravitated to the system come back 6 months later and their sales are plummeting, and you're like, why? And you find out they're not telling the right stories, they're not asking, they're not following the system at all. So they've just decided to reinvent the wheel, not because it wasn't working, but because they couldn't lean into their personality type, which they see value in. So what was interesting is I learned really that I was introverted by discovering this issue, trying to figure out why, and realizing that people on the far end of the extroverted spectrum are actually quite difficult to manage, difficult to get to follow systems. So then I started to go, well, why don't I? And I'm like, okay, well, I'm introverted. Okay, now I get it. And then all of a sudden it clicked and it started to make sense. And it's really interesting. Like, I deliver a keynote presentation all over the world called Rapid Growth the Lazy Way. And so when I got to moved to the US, I started talking about the fact that most introverted service providers really can have a rapid growth business doing what they love, but not by focusing on their functional skill. They're usually amazing at that, but instead on the 3 things outside the scope of their functional skill that really allow them to have a business that revolves around them, their family, and their life, not the other way around. And what that is it's learning how to differentiate. So not identifying or introducing yourself by your functional skill, because that's a nightmare and it leads to a whole bunch of, oh, I need that. How much do you cost? Which is horrible. Or, oh, I already have that and it didn't work for me. Now you've got to do that. Oh, I'm different. I've got magic ruby slippers dance that nobody can stand. So differentiating is important. Then I talk about niche marketing and why it's important, especially when you start with a micro niche and then build your way out, which sounds counterintuitive, but actually leads to a much better result, even in the short term. And then how they need to have a better sales system. Or in an introvert's case, a structured sales system that is, almost process driven, like, manufacturing a vehicle that's structured to work. And before I started telling that story about sales, I would tell my own personal journey. And what was interesting is, I'd always get people say, Matt, your presentation was great. And I got a lot of value out of it, and I'll apply it, and all those things that every speaker kind of hears if they've done a good presentation. But the level of energy I would get from quite a few introverts that would come up afterwards and they would say, that presentation was great, but this piece where you talked about your introversion and told me that it was possible, and that was transformational for me, because I just never knew that I could succeed. As a small business owner, I always thought I was going to be terrible at networking, sales. I could never speak. I could never lead. I couldn't do any of these things. And now I get that. Even if I don't apply any of this, I now know that success is possible for me, and that is meaningful. So, for me, I actually started with this book. I didn't want to write it, by the way. It was only, I kept telling other people to write it. I kept saying to every introverted sales trainer I knew, somebody should write a book on introverted sales. And everyone's like, no one's going to buy a book on introverted sales. Introverts don't want to learn to sell. And I'm like, there's a ton of introverts out there that run their own businesses that don't want to just grind by every day, struggling to find interested prospects, trying to set themselves apart, trying to make the sale, fighting on price. And so I just knew there should be a marketplace, but I didn't want to write it with my reading speed. There was no way I wanted to write it. So what I did, anyway, I worked with a ghostwriter that, as a client of mine, that I took from making basically no money. I mean, he made $27,000 in 2013 and $12,000 when we started working together in October of 2014. He said no one could afford $20,000 for a ghostwritten book. We doubled his price, and he made $120,000 by the end of the year, $300,000 the following year. He now charges $130,000 for a ghostwritten book, and we're doing this. I actually spoke to him recently. We're doing this interview on July 1st. He's booked out till mid next year, right? So he's like, Matt, you have to put these ideas, these strategies into a book. And finally, I went, you know what? Okay, I'll do it. And I worked with him, and even that was tough for me because I had to listen to every word, and every time he wrote, a chapter which would be 5,000 words, I'd write 3,500 words of notes after listening to it with the robot voice. It's horrible work. But that's why the book reads so conversationally, because I have to listen. I can't read. And, we did that every day for a very long time. I'm not even going to say how long, but now it's sold 75,000 copies, the first book, and it's in 16 languages. So it's just proven that so many introverts, it's not that they're not trying, it's that they don't know that they can. And as soon as that barrier is broken, then all of a sudden it's like the dam has burst, and they can't get enough training that's introvert specific.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, your first book was very successful. And, you really hit on some things. It's like I've done speeches with an extroverted partner and watched how they can just wing things. And, it definitely turns out much better than if I was to wing the speech or whatever. But I've learned, and we know as introverts, one of our superpowers is preparation. We have to prepare for things, and it produces great results. And I love podcasting, and some people might say, hey, introverts and podcasting, that's kind of crazy, but I do prepare for it, and that's the big thing. And so, a lot of introverts are going to say, oh yeah, or people, I often get the question, what's the best job for introverts? And I'll always say, the job that uses your strengths, honors your needs, supports you financially, and what I'll say is an introvert can go into sales, as you'll say, and be very successful, but they have to come up with their system that works for them.
Yeah, absolutely. They also the pain's got to be worth the gain. Let's be honest. I mean, what I find, I've got this. So I've got a podcast called The Better Business Coach. I have a podcast called The Introvert's Edge too, by the way. So for those people that want to go, I interview a bunch of successful introverted titans on that. So feel free to check that out. But I have this podcast called The Better Business Coach as well. And one of the episode 17 is called Forget About Goals, Why is the Key to Success? And I talk about that, one of the exercises I tell people to do is I say, set 3 business goals, 3 personal goals, 1 selfish to yourself, because that's the one that's going to drive you. And then once you've done that, then summarize each one of those goals in 250 words or less, including why it's important to you. And what I find is high achievers are really good at writing their goals, but their goals are usually inherited from their mother, their father, their, drunk roommate they had in college. They hear these things like, that's what I want, and they charge after it. And then they wonder why they don't muster that fire in their belly to go after it and get it. I mean, it's actually worse when you hit it because you realize it wasn't important, but most people never even try, especially introverts that have this barrier to getting there requires them to sell or network or public speak. But what's interesting is in that why statement, the whole idea of this is to summarize why it's important, where you get into talking about your passion and mission. Because I think these days, with the number of jobs that are available, the number of businesses we can run, the truth is that, I mean, I can create a rapid growth business out of anything, but there is nothing worse than a rapid growth business with customers you don't like in a business that you cannot stand. So because of that, it is so important that you create a business that really aligns with that, because then you will make more money, it will support your family, and you'll go to work every day energetic. Like if you look at the amount of energy that this interview is taking from me, or it is there. That energy is coming from passion. It's coming from mission. It's not coming from, oh, I'm going to hit this financial target. Because again, that's not enough to just push you through. And sure, if you've got kids that are hungry or you're not making enough money, you'll push yourself to a line that stops being the case, but then you'll stop going that extra mile. So you have to align what you do with passion. And I can tell you that, I mean, you can find passion in anything that you do. Like if I've worked with people that are in insurance that, I don't know, I went to insurance because I wanted to help people. And once you gravitate a little bit more, they've resonated with these products because these specific insurance products allow farmers to put their high cash flow in so they can yield high interest while, throughout the year, so they can stimulate that into other financial products while keeping the cash readily on hand. And it's like, well, that's huge. Why don't you just focus on that group? Would that be something you're passionate about? And the answer always comes back yes. So there's always a way to do what you're passionate about. Even if you're in a job that you can't stand, you can find a way to navigate to a new job or another job in that career, or the same job. You can start to navigate to something that you can do that you're passionate about. And truthfully, if you're in a business that you're not passionate about and you can't find passion, life's too short. You're gonna every day is gonna be hard to get out of bed. And therefore, you try and compete in my space against me when I get up every day ecstatic about doing stuff like this because I just live for it, right? You go to a networking event and you'll be like, oh, I'm a sales and marketing coach and, I help introverts, as opposed to talking about, firstly, you should never do that, by the way. Never talk about your functional skill. That's what everyone does when they're networking, right? They're like, oh, I'm a sales and marketing trainer and I work exclusively with introverts and I help them obtain growth. That's horrible, right? So one of the things that I always talk about, and if you don't have any passion, this is definitely hard, but I say talk about passion and mission, right? So I will say, well, firstly, you need to introduce yourself not by your functional skill. And I talk about how I call myself the rapid growth guy, which is what I call a unified message. But when somebody responds to that, like with what is that, right? Because our brain's programmed to put somebody in a box, disqualify them or accept them. And if we don't know what it is, we inquire, especially if we start by being interested rather than interesting. Then you respond with something like, well, one of the things I love to see more than anything in the world is an amazing introverted service provider with enough skill, talent, and belief in themselves to start a business for themselves. But one of the things, and I just hate seeing this, is I see more often than not, they get stuck in this endless hamster wheel of struggling to find interested people, trying to set themselves apart, trying to make the sale, all while believing that people only care about one thing, price. Do you know anyone like that? And of course they do, especially if I've gone to the right networking events. If I know my niche and I go to the right places. And then I'll respond with, well, one of the things that, I want you to know is you're not alone. There's so many introverts that struggle with that. As a matter of fact, it's my mission in life to help these introverts realize they can have the rapid growth business that they love, but not by focusing on their functional skill, by focusing on the three things outside the scope of their functional skill. Actually, you know what? Let me tell you about Wendy, right? So again, by building in passion, first thing as an introvert, it stops being about me. Instead of saying, this is my credentials and this is what I do, I talk about my passion for serving the world and what I love to see, what I hate to see in the mission that I'm on, which again is so much more congruent for an introvert. I always say the first one sounds like, hey, David, this is what I do and I'd love to have you as a client because I think if I got you as a client, it would really allow me to buy that new motor car I've been saving up for, as opposed to I'm on this mission to serve. And in truth, you could come up with a dialogue like that if you're not passionate about it, but you struggle to articulate it with that energy. But if you're truly passionate and you get to talk about your passion, it's like opening this supercharger that people feel in a networking room. They feel it when you're speaking. They feel it on a podcast, hopefully. And because of that, you have an advantage over everyone else.
Yeah, that's the key. Life is too short to not live within your passion. I meet too many people that are like, oh, I'm glad it's Friday. Monday's terrible. And I don't feel that way. I love what I do and everybody should be like that. And that's part of the work that we do. So your second book, The Introvert's Edge, specifically for networking, and you've been talking a lot about that. How do introverts really foster relationships, both within, the quote room, but outside of the room too? How do they foster relationships in their networking?
Well, absolutely. So, the first thing is that they really have to get their identity to be different to the functional skill that they have. I think, I was saying before, a lot of people it's like me saying, I'm walking into a room and somebody asking me what I do, and I say, oh, I'm a sales trainer. Well, the response I'm going to get is, oh, I'm an introvert. I could never sell. And now I've got to do the dance about convincing them that they can sell as an introvert. Or maybe I say I'm a sales trainer and they'll say, oh, yeah, I had a bad experience. And now they're looking at me like I'm one step above a scam artist, right? Not positive. If I say I'm a marketer, they go, oh, I need marketing. How much do you cost? Now I'm talking about price. So if I don't want to feel like a salesperson or feel like I'm trying to convince and cajole someone, which introverts don't feel comfortable with, period, I need to learn a different way of networking. Now, firstly, you need to understand you're not going to networking to make a sale. You should never try and sell in the room, and I'll explain that in a minute. Also, the second thing is, if you're going there to meet prospects, that's never going to get you out of the hamster wheel. There are two other groups of people that you really want to focus on meeting that will absolutely escalate your business, and you'll make more money in quick periods of time if you focus on those groups, but only if you're unique. If you're not unique, there's no way somebody can introduce you to someone. There's no way that people can recommend you in a way that's not like, oh, I know this insurance person, or I know this ghostwriter. Oh, yeah, I already know 1,000 of them. It's all right, I'm good. So you need to separate yourself from everyone else. And the best example I can give you of that is a girl called Wendy. So she was a language coach out of California. She taught kids and adults Mandarin. And for the longest time, she charged $50 to $80 an hour successfully. And now there were just more people moving into California, lots of them starting their own Mandarin education businesses, and those people wanted to charge $30 to $40 an hour to get their businesses started. So because of that, she was struggling to keep current clients, she was struggling to get new clients, and on top of that, she had to deal with the global economy that we're all confronted with, right? People on Craigslist offering to do it for $12 an hour from China. And then now, thanks to the technology built in Silicon Valley, David, I'll teach you Mandarin, you teach me English, we just won't charge anyone anything. So she's competing against free. So she comes to me and she says, how can you help me increase my sales and my closure rate and win more deals? And I said, look, I can help you with that. And sure, there's a load of techniques that, I talk about in my book about how to have a step-by-step process that leads to growth. But the truth is that you're always going to be competing in this crowded marketplace. They're always going to see you as a functional skill. So we need to sidestep that battle altogether. So what I did is I looked at all the clients that she'd worked with over the years. And of all of those, I discovered there were two people specifically that she helped with far more than just language tuition. These were executives being relocated across to China. Now, she helped them with these really cool things. Like, the first thing she helped them understand was the difference with rapport in China versus the Western world. David, if I was a really bad salesperson and I was trying to sell you something, at the end of 45 minutes, I might say something horrible like, so do you want to move forward? And you would say, yes, no, or everyone's favorite. Let me think about it, right? So a week from now, if I reach back out to you and you still say you want to think about it, I know my chances of getting that sale are going down and down. Yet in China, they're going to want to meet with you 5 or 6 times before they even discuss business. They're probably going to want to see you drunk over karaoke once or twice. It's just who they are. But it's because they're talking 25 to 100-year deals, not transactional, 12-month agreements. They need to know the character of the person more than anything else. And she helped them understand that. She helped them understand the difference between e-commerce in China and the Western world, and finally the importance of respect and why it matters so much, like why you have to reduce your accent, not just learn the language. For respect, why you have to handle a business card in a specific way, or people will see you as disrespectful and won't do business with you. I'm like, Wendy, stop. You're doing so much more for these people than just language tuition. What are you doing? And she said, well, there's just a few things. I'm just trying to help. And I said, all right, you're stuck in your functional skill. And by the way, everyone listening that has their own business, so are you as you're thinking about this, right? Everybody has unique experience, past customers that they've worked with, extra talents, qualifications that they have that perfectly qualify them to help a demographic of people. Yet we qualify ourselves in this functional box and we say, this is what I do and it's exactly the same as everyone else. How do I differentiate? The differentiation is these uniquenesses. So I said, Wendy, you're stuck in your functional skill. Is it fair to assume as a result of the assistance that you're giving these people, they're going to be more successful when they get to China? And she's like, yeah, that's the point, right? I said, great. I said, why don't we then call you the China Success Coach? Forget about Mandarin consulting for a second. Let's focus on what we ended up creating, which is what we called the China Success Intensive. It was a 5-week course that worked with the executive, the spouse, and any children being relocated to China so the whole family unit was successful. Otherwise, the executive, if the child's not doing well, they'll be home real quick. So she loved the idea of this, but she's like, well, who do I sell it to? And I said, well, who do you think you sell it to? What she's asking is, who do I go out and network with, or who do I reach out to online? Where do I write blog posts so that those people can find me? What podcast should I be on? And I said, well, who do you think it is? And she said, well, obviously, I mean, it's the executive. And I'm like, I get that. I mean, I was terrified moving from Australia to the United States. Imagine going to China where they speak a different language. I just don't think it's your ideal client. And she said, well, obviously the company will pay, so maybe they're the ideal client. I'm like, yeah, I mean, they have millions of dollars often riding on the executive being successful. I said, I still just don't think it's your ideal client. She's like, well, who then? And I said, I think your ideal client's the immigration attorney. And she looked at me with a puzzled face. And she said, what? And I said, look, these people make $5,000 to $7,000 for doing all the bureaucracy and all the paperwork that comes with a visa. They got to pay to get a client often. They have to do, they've got staff, they've got rent to pay. They'd be lucky to make $3,000 for to do a visa. I said, so offer them $3,000 for an introduction that's successful to the China Success Coach. So she started to network to meet immigration attorneys. And she would say, how would you like to double your profit for a simple introduction? And they're like, well, double my profit? Absolutely. What would I have to say? And she said, all you've got to do is say, congratulations, you've now got your visa. I just want to double check you're as ready as possible to be relocated to China. And, overconfident executive would say, yeah, I think we're good. We got our visa now. Thank you. We got our place sorted. We're learning the language. Kids are pretty good at it too. I think we're set. And they just respond with, there's actually a lot more to it than that. I think you need to speak to the China Success Coach. Wendy would then get on the phone with the easiest sale in the world. I mean, these people were terrified to go. The company was motivated to pay, recommended by their attorney. She charged $30,000 for this. After a $3,000 commission, she made $27,000 for the easiest sale in the world instead of struggling every day to make $50 to $80 an hour. So let's unpack that for a second. The first thing you got to do is look at the skills you have outside the scope of your functional skill. For Wendy, it was rapport, respect, e-commerce. The high-level benefit, which is the next question, was China Success. For me, I'm a sales systemization expert, a networking expert, a master in neuro-linguistic programming, a business coach, a marketing, a social media expert. I mean, I'm too many things. Nobody cares. Truthfully, no one cares how hard it was for me to learn these things or how long it took me to learn them. And by the way, neither do your clients, prospects care about that in your case either. But when I say what's the high level benefit, well, I help people obtain rapid growth. All people? No. Introverted service providers is my speciality. And because I've now got that, I can then go to the right networking events to look for people. Now, when somebody asks me what I do, instead of saying I'm a sales coach, which leads me to bad conversational network or a marketing specialist, I say I'm the rapid growth guy. And somebody goes, what exactly is that? And then I do the, I love to see this. I hate to see this. Do you know anyone like that? I'm on a mission too. And then I tell a story. All of a sudden, it feels so authentic. It feels so much about me talking about what I want to see change in the world and an example that I will demonstrate like I just did in a way that was educational and inspirational, but also kind of has that, hey, if you're looking to do this, I'm the only logical choice kind of feeling to it. Now, once you have that, when you go to a networking room, firstly, you should research who you speak to before you go. You need to understand there are 3 types of people in the room. The first person that you're going to meet is the prospect. That's the group you always think you're there to meet. And when you meet someone like that and you tell them this, they're going to go, oh my gosh, I'm just like Wendy. I need what Wendy has. What would working with you look like? And if you break the rule of selling in a networking room, watch that deal get less interested. Because what will happen is the moment you start talking about it, it's like karma. It's like a person walks up, interrupts the conversation, and there it is. It's dead. And also, you've acted overzealous. So because of that, you're going to not get the deal, or it's going to be less likely. So what you need to do is say, look, I'd love to talk to you about that, and thanks for asking, but now's not really the best time for that. We're all networking, meeting people, and plus, I'd love to understand your situation, differently, in a little bit more detail. We've all got our phones here. Why don't we schedule a call, a meeting, a coffee, whatever, and then get it scheduled? Or offer them some resources if they're not that interested to help them do it themselves. Either way, you've got a follow-up point. Always have a follow-up point. The second group you want to meet is what I call momentum partners. Now, momentum partners is what takes you out of that hamster wheel. These are the people that are inspired by what you've said. They're not necessarily your customer, but they know people that work with people just like you. And because of that, they introduce you to those people, or they have clients just like that work with, they have clients of theirs that also would be perfect clients of yours, and vice versa. And they know people that potentially that are that have podcasts that would be a great fit for you, that the listeners are your avatar. And because of that, they constantly introduce you to people, and you do the same for them because you both genuinely believe in what each other are doing. That's the group that gets you out of the hamster wheel, because they put you on a podcast like you're doing for me right now, David. Instead of talking to one person, I'm speaking to hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. And it allows you to get people to chase you as opposed to feeling like you're doing the chasing. And you can do that through, podcasts. You can do that through people that are just constantly introducing you to new people from their client base, or introducing you to people that have client bases that are, connected to, similar to your client base. So that group is hugely powerful. And then you've got the third group, and everyone tries to sell to this group. It's horrific. But the group of champions, if they ask you to go and pick up their laundry, you should do it, right? And you should never ask for anything in return. These are the people that give credit to your work, right? So Ivan Meisner, the founder of BNI, is a personal friend of mine. He's always posting about my book. He's inviting me onto his podcast. I've spoken at BNI's national conferences. And the truth is, I've never asked him for any of those things. I've just fostered a great friendship. I've given him advice where I felt like it was going to be welcomed, and I never offered to charge for any of it. And I just shared a great personal relationship to the point where he's like, well, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this, because high achievers, funnily enough, they can't help themselves. The reason why they got to the way where they got to was by helping others that then help them too. They get it. And the people that get it tend to like to help the people that they have relationships with. So you foster long-term relationships with champions. They give you work credit, and between them and the momentum partners, you watch your rates go up, and all of a sudden the deals come in with people that are actually like, oh, I heard you on this podcast, or so-and-so suggested I call you because you specialize in this, as opposed to you doing the dance in networking rooms. So what I always say is, if you can't successfully articulate the value of what you provide when you've got someone politely listening for 2 minutes in a networking room, you have no chance online when you get fractions of a second, or on podcasts where people listen to the first few seconds, and if they're not interested, they jump to the next episode. But if you can do it, then you can learn to articulate it in a way that uses technology to get people to chase you.
Matthew, on this show, we bust myths here. And a big one, introverts absolutely can be great at sales, great at networking, or fill in the blank, great at leadership, public speaking. But your work and your passion around sales and networking is so valuable. And this has been a great conversation today. Of course, where can people find out more about the great work you're doing, Matthew?
Well, I appreciate you asking. So truthfully, people should definitely check out my books, but my publisher hates me when I say this. You don't need to buy my books to get access to them. You can go to the introvertsedge.com for my sales book, or the introvertsedge.com/networking for my networking book. And there you'll be able to download the first chapter. As you know, David, I founded National Introverts Week. I have my podcast. I do a ton of things to support the introverted world. And to be aligned with that, my first chapters of both books get you over the belief that you can sell or you can network as an introvert. And my sales book, for example, also breaks down the full 7-step process you should use as an introvert selling. So if you just download the first chapter for free at the introvertsedge.com, and then literally grab the 7 steps headings and put what you currently say into that, you'll quickly realize there's some things that don't fit. Stop saying that to customers, right? It's the jargon that you shouldn't be talking about. The second thing you'll realize is some things out of order, and there's some gaping holes, usually around asking great questions, telling great stories. If you do nothing other than fix that and put the things in order, you will double your sales in the next 60 days. So I would highly recommend people do that. If you are looking to create your own version of the China Success Coach, the Rapid Growth Guy, and discover your niche, again, you don't need to hire me for that. You can go to matthewpollard.com/growth. And there you'll be able to download a template that, funnily enough, I did this at the I used this template at the National Freelance Conference. At the end of the session, I said, look, do me a favor, put your hand up if you now believe you have a unified message that will excite and inspire, and you've identified a niche of people that will pay you what you're worth. Like 97% of the room put their hands up. However, when I said, do me a favor, keep your hands up if this is the most time you've spent actively working on your marketing, like not reading about it, but actually doing the work, like 85% of the room put their hands up. The whole session was 90 minutes long. So the key is this will work if you spend the time doing it. What I would recommend, though, is you do it with somebody else. so that they can get you out of the functional skills. So if you're a copywriter, don't work with another copywriter. If you're a business coach, don't work with another business coach. But get that person, and I'm sure David won't mind, get that person to listen to this interview too, so you know what you're doing and why it's important. And then once you've done that, download the template and do it together. You spend an hour, hour and a half on them, get them to spend an hour, hour and a half on you, and you walk out with the message and the niche that you will feel congruent with to move forward and then feel more comfortable in networking. You pump that into my networking or my sales strategy, you'll do amazingly well. So definitely check out that. That's at matthewpollard.com/growth. Those are the best places to grab content, but you should also check out Introvert You. It's a new project that we're putting together that eventually David will contribute a piece of content to as well. I'm sure I've been working him down on this. But what we're doing is we're actually what we're doing now that my brand's got to a point, I'm trying to showcase other introverted experts. So if you're looking for experts on content that is outside the scope of what I do, check that out. There is a ton of content there by experts that are introverted coaches and experts that just so happen to be introverted, what I call introverted titans. And each one of them has created little micro learning courses, 5 to 10 videos that are all 5 to 10 minutes long, that actually allow you to grab the content, watch it today, and apply it tomorrow. Because the goal for me is to break down every barrier. Whatever you can think of that an introvert thinks they should struggle with, we're creating programs in that platform to make sure that not only do you think you shouldn't struggle with it, you can actually dominate in that area.
Yeah, so much great information shared. Thank you so much for being the introvert champion that you are, Matthew. I'll put all the links in the show notes. And thanks again. It was a pleasure having you on today.
Mate, it was an honor to be here. I'm glad we could finally do it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the website quietandstrong.com. It includes blog posts, links to social media channels, and send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. If you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there is now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including your 4-letter Myers-Briggs code. You can also purchase the full report if you'd like more details. I'll add a link to the show notes. There's so many great things about being an introvert, and so we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.